All right, we live again. We live again. We live again. It's raining here, and so the power went out. Okay. So for those who just joined us, this is a continuation of the first part, the introduction. This is Sister, please stay on topic. Birth of a Nation controversy, led project discussion, and it's needed to speak about because, as I said before, we tend to get caught up into these controversies. Some may go deeper, some may not. Everybody has an opinion. I personally like to kind of base my opinion on a bit of research, so that I can substantiate my viewpoint and not just how I feel. When we get stuck in, I feel this and I feel that, then the question is, well, what is that based on? Feelings have to be based on something. And when we can't appropriately vocalize and share, then this is where these barriers come from. I see a lot of issues surrounding this topic. People are upset. Sisters there's a lot of scandal going on. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Did everybody forget that this movie is artistic portrayal of a situation, and we might want to talk about the situation? So anyway, I got cut off on page 9, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep going here. Like I said, please stick with it, or go back and come back, or watch it in portions. Again, as we continue to elevate ourselves and in our search for truth, I'm a truth seeker, so is what it is. No more. You already just had some. It says here, let me go ahead and share the screen. Let's pick up where we left off before the thing then jacked up. My Jeezy here. All right, boom. He goes on to say, so basically, he's telling the story. This is the lawyer is interviewing him. It's a jailhouse confession. This is the original confessions of Nat Turner. There's so many Europeans saying, yeah, we attest it's true, and Nat Turner attested it is true. Historians tend to go back and forth on it. We're reading it because somebody asked, well, where did Nate Parker source his material for the movie? And why didn't he show more of this and less of that? And so we're looking to see if the person is not alive and you don't have a lot of intel, it makes it difficult to begin to add things in, because now you have changed the truth of it. And this happened with what we're going to talk about at another time. The next book, that is a novel written by a European man that became, last name Styron, that has become the Confessions of Nat Turner, which turned into a 400-page reimagining of Nat Turner, which, again, that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But let's read this one. This one precedes it, 1831. So he says, I'm trying to see where I was here. He says, knowing the influence I had obtained over the minds of my fellow servants, not by means of conjuring and such like tricks for them, I always spoke of such things with contempt, but by the communion of the Spirit, whose revelations I often communicated to them. So basically, the people who was walking Obia, the people who was doing witchcraft, and there's many testimonies in other stories of people, narratives, people continuing this thing. So he's saying he was influential, but it was not because he was Obia in that. He says, I now began to prepare them for my purpose by telling them something was about to happen that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me. About this time, I was placed under an overseer from whom I ran away. And after remaining in the woods 30 days, I returned, to the astonishment of the Negroes on the plantation, who thought I had made my escape to some other part of the country, as my father had done before. You see that indicated in the movie, that his father ran away because his father went to go take food, and because his son was hungry. This is what they put in the movie. And the father ran away because they were looking for him. He goes on to say, but he ran away and he came back 30 days later, 1 month later. But the reason of my return was that the Spirit appeared to me and said I had my wishes directed to the things of this world and not to the kingdom of heaven, and that I should return to the service of my earthly master. For he who knoweth his master's will and doeth it not shall be beaten with many stripes, and thus I have chastened you. And the Negroes found fault, So he was like, yo, why you came back, man? You could have been free. And he's saying he got a vision that told him to go back. Kind of like how Hagar had a vision that told her to go back and submit yourself to Sarah, your boss, basically. And so he's saying he had a similar thing, and he goes back. And the Negroes found fault and murmured against me, saying that if they had my sense, they would not serve any master in the world. And about this time, I had a vision. So this is where you see the movie keeps illustrating these visions. The way that he did the visions, okay, but this is Nat Turner, according to this narrative, saying that he had visions. And I saw white spirits and black spirits engaged in battle, and the sun was darkened, the thunder rolled in the heavens, and blood flowed in streams. And I heard a voice saying, such is your luck, such you are called to see, and let it come rough or smooth, you must surely bear it. I now withdrew myself as much as my situation would permit from the intercourse of my fellow servants. And again, I was speaking to somebody the other day about context and how words used to be used back in the day. This right here is not what has become today. From the intercourse of his fellows just mean communication. He stopped from talking too much to people. He just withdrew for the avowed purpose of serving the Spirit more fully. And it appeared to me and reminded me of the things it had already shown me, and that it would be then revealed to me the knowledge of the elements, the revolution of the planets, the operation of tides and changes of the season. After this revelation in the year 1825, at this time he's only 25, he was born in 1800, and the knowledge of the elements being made known to me, I sought more than ever to obtain true holiness before the great day of judgment should appear. And then I began to receive the true knowledge of faith. And from the first steps of righteousness unto the last was I made perfect. And then he says, and the Holy Ghost was with me and said, behold me as I stand in the heavens. And I looked and saw the forms of men in different attitudes. And there were lights in the sky, to which the children of darkness gave other names than that they really were, for they were the lights of the Savior's hands, and stretching forth from east to west, even as they were extended on the cross of Calvary for the redemption of sinners. Again, remember, because they're teaching him through the lens of Christianity. So the Bible was in the book. One of the mistresses found out that he can read, and she said she wanted to help him. She thought it was a good thing. This is in the book, so I'm not sure if this, because in this story he's saying that he learned to read on his own. And the narrative, and it possibly might be the Europeans' adaptation, said that the mistress taught him. Again, so the only thing they allotted him to read was the Bible, and through the lens of Christianity. I wondered greatly at the miracles and prayed to be informed of a certain of the meaning thereof. And shortly afterwards, while laboring in the field, I discovered drops of blood on the corn as though it were dew from heaven. That was in the movie. He had the corn in his hand. Blood started to come from the corn. And I communicated it to many, both white and black in the neighborhood. And I found on the leaves in the woods hieroglyphic characters, and numbers with the forms of men in different attitudes, portraying in blood and representing the figures I had seen before in the heavens. And now the Holy Ghost had revealed itself to me and made plain the miracles it had shown me. For as the blood, he says, of Christ had been shed on this earth and has ascended to heaven from the salvation of sinners, and was now returning to earth again in the form of dew, and as the leaves of the trees bore the impression of figures I have seen in the heavens, it was plain to me that the Savior was about to lay down the yoke. He was born for the sins of men, and the great day of judgment was at hand. About this time, I told these things to a white man, Eldridge T. Brantley, on whom it had a wonderful effect. And I believe this is indicated in the movie. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. For those who just joined us, 1 second. You can't put it on mute. This is Emunah Yisrael. Just give me 1 second. And so this is the second part, because it started raining and we got cut off. But I'm reading the Confessions of Nat Turner, the Jailhouse Confession, 1831. This is what they're saying, firsthand, primary source. He's dictating his story, and we want to see, is it matching up with the narrative that we see in the movie? And should we be getting what we need to get from this, as opposed to being distracted with a whole lot of other stuff that if we don't first deal with this, all that is topical, but I'll continue. So he says he relates it to this European, on whom it had wonderful effect, and he ceased from his wickedness and was attacked immediately with a contentious eruption, and blood oozed from the pores of his skin. And after praying and fasting 9 days, he was healed. And the Spirit appeared to me again and said, as the Savior has been baptized, so should we be also. And when the white people would not let us be baptized by the church, we went down into the water together in the sight of many who reviled us, and were baptized by the Spirit. In the movie, it shows that, I don't know if it's this same man, Eldritch, but the man wanted to repent and be baptized. He baptized them, and for this, the master whipped him for baptizing a white man. After this, I rejoiced greatly and gave thanks to God. It says, God, and on the 12th of May, 1828, he's 28 years old, I heard a loud noise in the heavens, and the Spirit instantly appeared to me and said, the serpent was loosened. That part is there. And Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. For the time was fast approaching when the first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first. That was in there. Question, do you not find yourself mistaken now? So the European lawyer dude is like, now you're in jail. So did it work? His answer, was not Christ crucified, and by signs in the heaven that it would make known to me when I should commence the great work? And until the first sign appeared, I should conceal it from the knowledge of men. And on the appearance of the sign, the eclipse on the sun last February, I should rise and prepare myself and slay my enemies with their own weapons. And immediately on the sign appearing in the heavens, the seal was removed from my lips, and I communicated the great work laid out for me to do, to four in whom I had the greatest confidence: Henry, Hark, Nelson, and Sam. So those are his co-conspirators, quote unquote, who were the core part of the group. Now, I have an interesting thing to say about Henry, but I'm not going to say it now. That's for another left project. It was intended by us to have begun the work on the death of the 4th July last. Many were plans formed and rejected by us, and it affected my mind to such a degree that I fell sick, and the time passed without our coming to any determination how to commence. Still forming new schemes and rejecting them, when the sign appeared again, which determined me not to wait longer. Since the commencement of 1830, I had been living with Mr. Joseph Travis, who was to me a kind master and placed the greatest confidence in me. In fact, I had no cause to complain of his treatment to me. On Saturday evening, the 20th of August, it was agreed between Henry Hawk and myself to prepare dinner the next day for men, which expected, and then to concert a plan, as we had not yet determined on any. Hark on the following morning brought a pig, and Henry brandy, and being joined by Sam, Nelson, William, and Jack, they prepared in the woods a dinner, where about 3 o'clock I joined them. The question, why were you so backward in joining them? Answer, the same reason that had caused me not to mix with them for years before. I saluted them on coming up and asked, how came he there? He answered, his life was worth no more than others, and his liberty as dear to him. I asked him if he thought to obtain it. He said he would, or lose his life. This was enough to put him in full confidence. Jack I knew was only a tool in the hands of Hark. It was quickly agreed we would commence at home, Mr. J. Travis, on that night, and until we had armed and equipped ourselves and gathered sufficient forth, neither age nor sex was to be spared, which was invariably adhered to. This is the quotations. That's the man speaking. Yeah. It says, we remained at the feast until 2 hours in the night, when we went to the house and found Austin. They all went to the cider press and drank except myself. On returning to the house, Hart went to the door with an axe for the purpose of breaking it open, as we knew we were strong enough to murder the family if they were awakened by the noise, but reflected that it might create an alarm. That it might create an alarm in the neighborhood. We determined to enter the house secretly and murder them while sleeping. Hart got a ladder and set it against a chimney, on which I ascended and hoisted a window, entering and came downstairs, unbarred the door, and removed the guns from their places. It was then observed that I must spill the first blood, on which, armed with a hatchet and Accompanied by Will, I entered my master's chamber, it being dark. I could not give a death blow. The hatchet glanced from his head. He sprang from the bed and called for his wife. It was his last word. Will laid him dead with a blow of his axe, and Mr. Travis shared the same fate as she lay in the bed. The murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of a moment. Not one of them awoke. There was little infant sleeping in a cradle. Hold on one second once again. Hold on once again. This is the conversation that, the movie wasn't able to go into in fullness. It showed it in a level, but once again, this is the information that has been left on record. So give me a minute. Yeah, the babies have to go that way. I'm telling my daughter, take it to the room. He goes on to say, just go ahead. She's going to follow you. Where am I? Will laid him dead with a blow of the axe, and Travis saved the same fate as she lay in bed. Mrs. Travis, the murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of a moment. Not one of them awoke. There was a little infant sleeping in a cradle that was forgotten until we had left the house and gone some distance, when Henry and Will returned and killed it. We got here 4 guns that would shoot and several old muskets with a pound or 2 of powder. We remained some time at the barn where we paraded. I formed them in a line as soldiers, and after carrying them through all the maneuvers, I was master of marched them off to Mr. Shalaful Francis, about 600 yards distance. Again, he's giving all the names and he's giving the course of action. It says here, Mr. Francis asked who was there. Sam replied it was him, and he had a letter for him, on which he got up and came to the door. They immediately seized him and dragged him out a little from the door. He was dispatched by repeated blows on the head. There was no other white person in the family. We started from there, from Mrs. Reese's, maintaining the most perfect silence in our march. Where finding the door unlocked, we entered and murdered Mrs. Reese in her bed while sleeping. Her son awoke, but it was only to sleep the sleep of death. He had only time to say, who is that? And he was no more. From Mrs. Reese, we went to Mrs. Turner, a mile distance, which we reached about sunrise on Monday morning. Henry, Austin, and Sam went to the still, where, finding Mrs. Pebbles, Austin shot him, and the rest of us went to the house. As we approached, the family discovered us and shut the door. Vain hope. Will, with one stroke of his axe, opened it, and we entered and found Mrs. Turner and Mrs. Newsom in the middle of a room, almost frightened to death. While immediately killed Mrs. Turner with one blow of his axe, or Will immediately killed her with one blow of his axe. I took Mrs. Newsom by the hand, and with the sword I had when was apprehended, I struck her several blows over the head, but not being able to kill her as the sword was dull. While turning around and discovering it, dispatched her also. A general destruction of property and search for money and ammunition always succeeded the murders. By this time, my company amounted to 15, and 9 men mounted, who started for Mrs. Whitehead's. The other 6 were to go through a byway to Mrs. Bryant's and rejoin us at Mrs. Whitehead's. As we approached the house, we discovered Mr. Richard Whitehead standing in the cotton patch near the lane fence. We called him over into the lane, and Will, the executioner, was near at hand with his fatal axe to send him into an untimely grave. As we pushed on to the house, I discovered someone run round the garden, thinking it was some of the White family. I pursued them, but finding it was a servant girl belonging to the house, I returned to commence the work of death. But they whom I left had not been idle. All the family were already murdered, but Mrs. Whitehead and her daughter Margaret. As I came around the door, I saw Will pulling Miss Whitehead out of the house, and at the step nearly severed head from her body with his broad axe. Will was a beast. I mean, Will was going in. I wonder what they did to him. Miss Margaret, when I discovered her, had concealed herself in the corner formed by the projection of a cellar cap from the house. On my approach, she fled, but was soon overtaken, and after repeated blows with the sword, I killed her by a blow on the head with a fence rail. By this time, the 6 who had gone by Mr. Brandt rejoined us and informed me that they had done the work of death assigned them. We again divided, part going to Mr. Richard Porter's, and from thence to Nathaniel Francis, the others to Mr. Howell Harris and Mr. T. Dulles. So they knew these people. They knew, I don't know if you guys could see, they knew these people. They knew what they were about. They heard the stories. This is all people from neighboring plantations going on what is this retaliation, of which the Europeans are like, what? I don't know if you guys could see the screen, but I'm gonna keep reading. Again, this is accessible. I will put the link in the box. You can read it again over on your own at your own discretion. It says, Miss Margaret, when I discovered her, no, I read that part already. On my reaching Mr. Porter's, he had escaped with his family. I understood there that the alarm had already spread, and I immediately returned to bring up those sent to Mr. Doyle's and Mr. Howell Harris. The party I left going on to Mr. Francis, having told them I would join them in that neighborhood. I met these sent to Mr. Doyle and Mr. Harris, returning, having met Mr. Doyle on the road and killed him, and learning from some who joined them that Mr. Harris was from home. I immediately pursued the course taken by the party going on before, but knowing they would complete the work of death and pillage at Mr. Francis before I could get there, like they wasn't hesitating, my goodness. I went to Mr. Peter Edwards, expected to find them there, but they had been here also. I then went to Mr. John T. Barrows. They had been there and murdered him. I pursued on their track to Captain Newitt Harris, where I found the greater part mounted and ready to start. The men, now amounting to about 40, shouted and hurrahed as I rode up. Some were in the yard loading their guns, others drinking. They said Captain Harris and his family had escaped. The property in the house they destroyed, robbing him of money and other valuables. I ordered them to mount and march instantly. This was about 9 or 10 o'clock Monday morning. I proceeded to Mr. Larry Waller's, 2 or 3 miles distance. I took my station in the rear, and it was towards my object to carry terror and devastation wherever we went. I placed 15 or 20 of the best armed and most to be relied on in front, who generally approached the houses as fast as their horses could run. This was for 2 purposes: to prevent their escape and strike terror in the inhabitants. On this account, I never got to the houses after leaving Mrs. Whitehead until the murders were committed, except in one case. I sometimes got in sight in time to see the work of death completed, viewed and mangled bodies as they lay in silent satisfaction, and immediately started to quest of other victims. Having murdered Mr. Waller and 10 children, we started for Mr. William Williams. Having killed him and 2 little boys that were there while engaged in this, Mr. Williams fled and got some distance from the house, but she was pursued, overtaken, compelled to get up behind one of the company, who brought her back, and after showing her the mangled body of her lifeless husband, she was told to get down and lay down by his side, where she was shot dead. I then started for Mr. Jacob Williams, where the family were murdered. Here we found a young man named Drury, who had come on business with Mr. Williams. He was pursued and overtaken and shot. Mr. Vaughn was the next place we visited, and after murdering the family here, I determined on starting for Jerusalem, which was a city in the county of Virginia. Our numbers amounted now to 50 or 60, all mounted and armed with guns, axes, swords, and clubs. On reaching Mr. James W. Parker's gate, immediately on the road leading to Jerusalem, and about 3 miles distant, it was proposed to me to call there, but I objected, as I knew he was going to Jerusalem, and my object was to reach there as soon as possible. But some of the men having relations at Mr. Parker, it was agreed that they might call and get his people. I remained at the gate on the road with 7 or 8. The others going across the field to the house about half a mile. After waiting some time for them, I became impatient and started to the house for them. And on our return, we were met by a party of white men who had pursued our blood-stained tracks and who had fired on those at the gate and dispersed them, which I knew nothing of. Not having been at the time rejoined by any of them, I immediately, on discovering the whites, I ordered my men to halt and form, as they appeared to be alarmed. The white men, 18 in number, approaching us in about 100 yards, when one of them fired. This was against the positive orders of Captain Alexander P. Pete, who commanded, and who had this is a bracket, so this is the Euro talking. This was against the positive orders of Captain Alexander P. Pete, who commanded, and who had directed the men to reserve their fire until within 30 paces, in bracket. And I discovered about half of them retracting. I then ordered my men, this is back to Nat Turner, I then ordered my men to fire and rush on them. The few remaining stood their ground until we approached within 50 yards, when they fired and retreated. We pursued and overtook, some of whom we thought we left dead. They were not killed. This is bracket again. After pursuing them about 200 yards and rising a little hill, I discovered they were met by another party and had halted, and we were reloading their guns. And then he has brackets. This was a small party from Jerusalem who knew the Negroes were in the field and had just tied their horses to wait their return to the road, knowing that Mr. Parker and family were in Jerusalem, but knew nothing of the party that had gone to Captain Pete. On hearing the firing, they immediately rushed to the spot, arriving just in time to arrest the progress of these barbarous villains and save the lives of their friends and fellow citizens, in bracket. Thinking that those who retreated first and the party who fired on us at 50 or 60 yards distance had all only falling back to meet others with ammunition. Again, for those who have just joined us, I am reading the Confessions of Nate Turner, Jailhouse Confession, 1831. Lawyer goes in, takes his, report of what happened. So this is supposed to be a first-hand report of Nat Turner. How accurate is it as it relates to what we're seeing in the movie? This is the question right about now. We're doing some fact checking. So that when we have this conversation, it's not just purely emotional. It's based on, no, I'm not answering that right now. We deep in, sister, please stay on topic. So, we're showing that sisters can stay on topic. And once you deal with your emotional intelligence, give me a minute while this phone starts ringing, then we can be able to have conversations and really outline the issues and the real problems. So I'm going to continue here. I'm just going to check and see if anybody has any questions or comments. And then I'm going to continue with this.
Babies spit up. It's normal because a new baby's stomach is only the size of a marble. So what goes down doesn't always stay down. Luckily, most babies grow out of spit up as their stomachs grow bigger and more mature. From the size of a ping pong ball at 3 days.
Won't stop making noise.
Is only the size of a.
Okay. All right. Peace and blessings, brother. Peace and blessings. So now if you have any questions or comments, I can see. Once again, we read in the nitty gritty right about now. As I saw them reloading their guns and more coming up than I saw at first, and several of my bravest men being wounded, the others became panic struck and squandered over the field. The white men pursued and fired on us several times. Hard had his horse shot under him, and I caught another from him as it was running by me. 5 or 6 of the men were wounded, but none left on the field. Finding myself defeated here, I instantly determined to go through a private way and cross the Nottoway River at the Cypress Bridge, 3 miles below Jerusalem, and attack that place in the rear. As I expected, they would look for me on the other road. So he's the strategist. You understand? He's the mastermind. So he says, and I had a great desire to get there to procure arms and ammunition. After going a short distance in this private way, accompanied by about 20 men, I overtook 2 or 3 who told me the others were dispersed in every direction. After trying in vain to collect a sufficient force to proceed to Jerusalem, I determined to return, as I was sure they would make back to their own neighborhood where they would rejoin me, make new recruits, and come down again. On my way back, I called to Mrs. Thomas's, Mrs. Spencer's, and several other places, the white families having fled. We found no more victims to gratify our thirst for blood. We stopped at Miss Major Ridley's quarter for the night, and being joined by 4 of his men with the recruits made since my defeat, we mustered now about 40 strong. So they keep re-upping dissonance. I mean, people who are not content. It says, after placing our sentinels, I laid down to sleep, but was quickly roused by a great racket. Starting up, I found some mounted and others in great confusion, one of the sentinels having given the alarm that we were about to be attacked. I ordered some to ride round and reconnoitre, and on their return, the others, being more alarmed, not knowing who they were, fled in different ways, so that I was reduced to about 20 again. With this, I determined to attempt to recruit and procure on to the rally in the neighborhood. I had left Dr. Blunt was the nearest house, which we reached just before day. On riding up the yard, Hark fired a gun. We expected Dr. Blunt and his family were at Major Ridley's. As I knew there was a company of men there, the gun was fired to ascertain if any of the family were at home. We were immediately fired upon and retreated, leaving several of my men. I do not know what became of them, as I never saw them afterwards. Pursuing our course back and coming in sight of Captain Harris, where we had been the day before, we discovered a party of white men at the house, on which all deserted me but two, Jacob and Nat. We concealed ourselves. Oh, in quotation it says but two, and he puts Jacob and Nat. We concealed ourselves in a wood until near night, when I sent them in search of Henry, Sam, Nielsen, and Hark, and directed them to rally all they could at the place we had our dinner the Sunday before, where they would find me, and I accordingly returned there as soon as it was dark, remained until Wednesday evening, when discovering white men riding around the place as though they were looking for someone, and none of my men joining me, I concluded Jacob and Nat had been taken and compelled to betray me. On this, I gave up all hope for the present, and on Thursday night, after having supplied myself with provisions for Mrs. Travis's, I scratched a hole under a pile of fence rails in a field, where I concealed myself for 6 weeks, never leaving my hiding place but for a few minutes in the dead of night to get water, which was very near. Thinking by this time I would venture out, I began to go out about in the night and eavesdrop the houses in the neighborhood, pursuing this course for about a fortnight and gathering little or no intelligence, afraid of speaking to any human being, and returning every morning to my cave before the dawn of day. I know not how long I might have led this life, if accident had not betrayed me. A dog in the neighborhood passed by my hiding place one night while I was out, was attracted by some meat I had in my cave, and crawled in and stole it, and was coming out just as I returned. A few nights after, two Negroes, having started to go hunting with the same dog, and passed that way, the dog came again to the place, and having just gone out to walk about, discovered me and barked. On which, thinking myself discovered, I spoke to them to beg concealment. On making myself known, they fled from me. Because, everybody was like, whoa, don't talk to this dude, Nat Turner, because they started killing people, over 200 people. The Europeans rose up and murdered. Knowing then they would betray me, I immediately left my hiding place and was pursued almost incessantly until I was taken a fortnight afterwards by Mr. Benjamin Phipps, in a little hole I had dug out with my sword for the purpose of concealment under the top of a fallen tree. On Mr. Phipps discovering the place of my concealment, he cocked his gun and aimed at me. I requested him not to shoot, and I would give up, upon which he demanded my sword. I delivered it to him, and he brought me to prison. During the time I was pursued, I had many hairbreadth escapes, which your time will not permit you to relate. I am here loaded with chains and willing to suffer the fate that awaits me. And then we're going to proceed. We're on page 18 of this conversation. I'm going to leave it in the box. We are getting, hey, what's up, Tora? Long time, for real. I haven't been on Periscope in a minute. I'm late, but is this Confessions of Nat Turner? This is the real one. Freedom School. This is 1831 one. And this is what we wanted to also bring out to those who are new to this conversation, that there are actually two confessions of Nat Turner. One of which created a big, huge uproar, of which we'll speak on another time, in 1968. And this is the jailhouse confession of 1831. And so this is so very interesting and important for us to know as we're having this conversation, for us to kind of get our facts straight. So definitely, we're on page 18. He talked about, so you could imagine 6 weeks, terror is running through these people's veins. Like this dude is, he's at large basically for 6 weeks. He's at large, and they are afraid because they've been afraid. Understand, the fear was already real, so he played on that fear and all of the elements that's come. So go. Hold on one second. Go ahead, Shiloh. Take her for me. I here proceed to make some inquiries of him. This is the lawyer now. After assuring him of the certain death that awaited him, and that concealment would only bring destruction on the innocent as well as guilty. Why would you kill the innocent? And according to them, his act was so wicked and terrible, and they turned around and did the same thing. Of his own color, if he knew of any extension or concerted plan. His answer was, I do not. When I questioned him as to the insurrection in North Carolina happening about the same time, he denied any knowledge of it. And when I looked him in the face as though I would search his innermost thoughts, he replied, I see, sir, you doubt my word. But can you not think the same ideas and strange appearances about this time in the heavens might prompt others as well as myself to this undertaking? I now had much conversation with and asked him many questions, having forborne to do so previously, except in the case noted in parentheses. But during his statement, I had unnoticed by him taking notes as to some particular circumstance, and having the advantage of his statement before me in writing on the evening of the third day that I had been with him, I began to cross-examine and found his statement corroborated by every circumstance coming within my own knowledge or the confessions of others whom had been either killed or executed. What's the difference? Killed or executed? I guess the way in which they died, and whom he had not seen nor had any knowledge of since the 22nd of August last. And it's funny because when did they start to persecute Nate Parker about this movie? Think about it. When did he begin to become persecuted about this whole rape allegation? When did it come out? Meditate on that. Meditate on that. Remember, the whole thing popped off and they have been separated in and around the same time that the movie is coming out. Nate Parker was born the 2nd of October. The movie comes out a little later. All this stuff is going down, and it's all around the same time. He expressed himself fully satisfied as to the impracticability of his attempt. It has been said he was ignorant and cowardly. By who? I wonder who's saying that. And that his object was to murder and rob for the purpose of obtaining money to make his escape. It is notorious that he was never known to have $1 in his life. So he wasn't about that money. It wasn't about money for him. To swear an oath or to drink a drop of spirits. So what he said of himself, this man, even though he hates his guts, is attesting that, he's straight as an arrow. As to his ignorance, he certainly never had the advantages of education, but he can read and write. It was taught him by his parents. So the movie is trying to make it look like it was edified by the slave master. He's reaffirming that it was taught to him by his parents. And for natural intelligence and quickness of apprehension is surpassed by few men I have ever seen. As to his being a coward, his reason as given for not resisting Mr. Phipps shows the decision of his character. When he saw Mr. Phipps present his gun, he said he knew it was impossible for him to escape, as the woods were full of men. He therefore thought it was better to surrender and trust to fortune for his escape. He is a complete fanatic, or plays his part most admirably. On other subjects, he poses an uncommon share of intelligence. So again, according to the European, you're dumb, you're an idiot, you shouldn't know anything, and he's not normal. How does he know these things? It's uncommon share of intelligence with a mind capable of attaining anything, but warped and perverted by the influence of every impression. He is below the ordinary stature, though strong and active, having the true Negro face, every feature of which is strongly marked. I shall not attempt to describe the effect of his nature as told and commented on by himself in the condemned hole of the prison. The calm, deliberate composure with which he spoke. And by the way, I received that in the movie, Nate Parker was able to translate that. You felt that. It says the calm, deliberate composure with which he spoke of his late deeds and intentions, the expressions of his fiend-like face with excitement by enthusiasm, still bearing the stains of blood of helpless innocent about him, clothed with rags and covered with chains, yet daring to raise his manacles hands to heaven with a spirit soaring above the attributes of man. I looked on him, and my blood curdled in my veins. Let me let that sink in. Let me let that sink in for a minute. This interviewer was upset in his affirmation that he was called to do what he did. And the man said, in his reaffirming that he's not, sorry, basically, clothed in rags, he said he's in chains and manacles. He had a spirit that soared above the attributes of men. The man said he looked on him and his blood curdled in his veins. He goes on to say, I will not shock the feelings of humanity nor wound afresh the bosom of the disconsolate sufferers in this unparalleled and inhumane massacre by detailing the deeds of their fiend-like barbarity. There were 2 or 3 who were in the power of these wretches, had they known it, and who escaped in the most providential manner. There were 2 whom they thought they left dead on the field at Mr. Parker's, but who were only stunned by the blows of their guns, as they did not take time to reload when they charged on them. The escape of a little girl who went to school at Mr. Waller's, and where the children were collecting for the purpose, excited general sympathy at their teacher, and not arrived. They were at play in the yard, and seeing the Negroes approach, she ran up on a dirt chimney, such as were common to log houses, and remained there unnoticed during the massacre of the 11 that were killed at this place. So 1 got away, they're saying. She remained in her hiding place till just before the arrival of a party who were in pursuit of the murderers, when she came down and fled to a swamp where, a mere child as she was, with the horrors of the late scene before her, she lay concealed until the next day, when, seeing a party going up to the house, she came up, and on being asked how she escaped, replied with the utmost simplicity, the Lord helped her. She was taken up behind a gentleman of the party and returned to the arms of her sweeping mother. Miss Whitehead concealed herself between the bed and the mat that supported it, while they murdered her sister in the same room without discovering her. She was afterwards carried off and concealed for protection by a slave of the family, who gave evidence against several of them on their trial. So it's funny because a slave cannot testify. A black person, on the books, it was illegal to testify against a white person. So I'm trying to figure out, the slave concealed her, Mrs. Whitehead, and I'm thinking he's saying that Miss Whitehead testified against them on a trial, or the slave, not sure. Mrs. Nathaniel Francis, while concealed in the closet, heard their blows and the shrieks of the victims of these ruthless savages. You hear the illustration that killing and murdering people as a retribution act is wicked and terrible, but yet still Nat Turner and those who are seeking to rebel was thinking to rebel on July the 4th. But July the 4th represents people who rebelled against an oppressive system and killed them, and then rejoice, and still rejoice up until this day. But the history is being told by, depending on who's telling the story. So again, you have to remember, he puts in little salty things here and there, but at the same time, there's still country. Look, 2 days ago, which is October the 10th, Columbus Day, still rejoicing at the murder and brutality of killing. Nobody is saying that killing is what you should be doing, but it's funny how one person justifies killings and the other, you're a brute, savage, wicked individual who should die slow. The dichotomy is real. Let me see here. Let me continue. For those who just joined us right now, we're reading the actual factual, what is said to be the words, first-hand account of Nat Turner. While everybody's in the controversy, we're going to go back to the root, right? All right, cool. Let's roll. It says, all right, she was hiding in the closet. While in this hiding place, she heard 2 of the women in a quarrel about the division of her clothes. So I guess that, now how come you ain't say slave woman here? Who else is quarreling? Mr. John T. Barton, or Baron, discovered them approaching his house, told his wife to make her escape, and scorning to fly, fell fighting on his own threshold. After firing his rifle, he discharged his gun at them and then broke in over the villain who first approached him, but he was overpowered and slain. His bravery, however, saved from the hands of those monsters his lovely and amiable wife, who will long lament a husband so deserving of her love. I got so much to say. Let me just keep reading. As directed by him, she attempted to escape through the garden when she was caught and held by one of the servant girls. She was caught and held by one of her servant girls, but another coming to her rescue, she fled to the woods and concealed herself. So one servant was like, "Hey, girl, where I come? Go for and come here." And the next one let her go. For few indeed were those who escaped their work of death. But fortunate for society, the hand of retributive justice has overtaken them, and not one that was known to be concerned has escaped. So I guess him saying retributive justice, he understands that retributive justice doesn't just go one way. And it says here the Commonwealth versus, let me let you guys see this. So that it was his little 2 cents that he put in there. I'm reading an actual article here. Wait, let me let you guys see this. This is his little 2 cents that I just finished reading about what he heard. And now I believe that this is now the court record right here. Again, like I said, this is the original, one of the copies of the original. I have 2 of these that I'm going to put in the box. You could see this is where they transcribed it from. This was a pamphlet that ended up being typed up. If you didn't hear me before, this was a pamphlet that ended up being typed up, a book, a small book, and sold. And it sold over 50,000 copies because the Europeans were very confused. They were sent into derision. They were very afraid, and they wanted to know how, because everybody was afraid that this is going to happen. The Negroes is going to rise up. And after this point, a lot of things in history, they tightened up a lot of things. No reading, beating you. A lot of these laws came into effect because of what we're going to talk about in another segment. But anyway, page 21. The Commonwealth, of course, of Virginia versus Nat Turner. Charged with making insurrection and plotting to take away the lives of diverse free white peoples, etc., on the 22nd of August, 1831. I have to find out when this story broke about Nate Parker, because I believe it's in August when they started persecuting for the same stuff because this movie was coming out. The court composed of blank, having met for the trial of Nate Turner, the prisoner was brought in and arraigned, and upon his arraignment pleaded not guilty, saying to his counsel that he did not feel so. On the part of the Commonwealth, Levy Waller was introduced, who being sworn deposed as follows, agreeable to Nat's own confession. Colonel Trevance was then introduced, who being sworn narrated Nat's confession to him as follows. And his confessions as given by Mr. Gray, which we just read. The prisoner introduced no evidence, and the case was submitted without argument to the court, who, having found him guilty, Jeremiah Cobb, Esquire Chairman, pronounced the sentence of the court in the following words. Nat Turner, stand up. Have you anything to say why sentence of death should not be pronounced against you? Answer, I have not. I have made a full confession to Mr. Gray, and I have nothing more to say. Attend then to the sentence of the court. You have been arraigned and tried before this court and convicted of one of the highest crimes in our criminal code. Can anybody tell me what's one of the highest crimes in the criminal code? It's not murder. It's not murder. It's murder of a white person. That's the highest crime. Okay. So we have to understand it's not murder, because they went and murdered, continued to murder. So it wasn't murder of life. It wasn't taking of life of all. It was taking of a European life, a so-called white person. It goes on to say, you have been convicted of plotting in cold blood the indiscriminate destruction of men, of helpless women, and of infant children. The evidence before us leaves not a shadow of a doubt, but that your hands were often imbrued in the blood of the innocent, and your own confession tells us that they were stained with the blood of a master in your own language, too indulgent. Could I stop here, your crime would be sufficiently aggravated. But the original contriver of a plan deep and deadly, one that never can be effected, you managed so far to put into execution as to deprive us of many of our most valuable citizens, and this was done when they were asleep and defenseless. Oh my, under circumstances shocking to humanity. I'm laughing because, again, the expectation of what you expect someone to afford for you, you have not afforded to others. And while upon this part of the subject, I cannot but call your attention to the poor misguided wretches who have gone before you. They are not few in number. They were your bosom associates. And the blood of all cries aloud and calls upon you as the author of their misfortune. See, you see the transference? It's not the system of racism and white supremacy. I'm sorry, I gotta take a minute. It's not the system of racism and white supremacy. It's not the chattel slavery. It's not the raping, pillages, and stealing of people and selling them, tearing them apart, and beating them down. That's the reason why his associates felt the need to be a part of the insurrection. It's all Nat Turner's fault. And so it's not the fact that I'm punching you in your face. It's the fact that you actually try to fight back when I punched you in your face. See, now you caused this to happen. So we have to understand the psychology behind this. I'll continue. I had to say that because this is wild. But anyway, I read it already too, right? And I'm acting like I didn't read it before. Anywho, he says, yes, you forced them unprepared from time eternity, borne down by this load of guilt. Your only justification is that you were led away by fanaticism. If this be true, from my soul, I pity you. Now I need your pity, and while you have many sympathies, I am nevertheless called upon to pass the sentence of the court. The time between this and your execution will necessarily be very short, and your only hope must be in another world. The judgment of the court is that you be taken hence to jail from whence you came, thence to the place of execution on Friday next, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Be hung by the neck until you are dead, dead, dead. And may the Lord have mercy upon your soul. The list of murderers murdered in the insurrection of 21st and 22nd of August, 1831. Joseph Travers and the wife, 3 children, Miss Elizabeth Turner, Hartwell Prebles, Sarah Newsom, Miss P. Reese, and son William Trajan Doyle, Henry Bryant, and wife and child and wife's mother, Miss Catherine Whitehead, son Richard, 4 daughters, grandchildren, Salathiel Francis, Nathaniel Francis, overseer, and 2 children, John T. Burrow, George Vaughn, Mrs. Levi Waller, and 10 children, William Williams, wife, 2 boys, Mrs. Caswell Worrell, child, Mrs. Rebecca Vaughn, Ann Eliza Vaughn, and son Arthur, Mrs. John K. Williams and child, Mrs. Jacob Williams and 3 children, Edwin Dury, amounting to 55. A list of Negroes brought before the court of Southampton with their names and sentences. Daniel, belonging to Richard Potter, convicted. Moses, J.T. Barrow. I don't know what D.O. is. If anybody knows what D.O. is, I don't know. Maybe I'll come to the abbreviation. Tom, Kathy White, belonged to Kathy Whitehead, discharged. Jack and Andrew, Kathy Whitehead, John, and transported. And I wonder how many people dropped dime. Of all these people, what was their story? Like, I want their narrative. But anyway, Jacob, G.O.H. Harleton, discharged without trial. Isaac, ditto, J.H. Harleton, convicted and transported. Jack, belonged to Everett Bryant, discharged. Nathan, Benjamin Blunt's estate, convicted. Nathan, Tom, and Davy boys. Nathaniel Francis, belonged to, convicted and transported. Davy, Elizabeth Turner, convicted. Curtis, Thomas Ridley, D.O. Stephen, D.O. Hardy and Isham, Benjamin Edwards, convicted, transported. Sam, Nathaniel Francis, convicted. Hark, which was part of the original Joseph Travis estate, D.O. Moses, a boy, D.O., and transported. Davy Levy Waller, belonging to, convicted. Nelson, belonging to Jacob Williams, D.O. Nat, Edmund Turner's estate, D.O. Jack, William Reese estate, D.O. Dred, his name was Dred. Nathaniel Francis, D.O. Arnold, artist, free. I guess it was a free person, discharged. And Sam, belonging to J.W. Parker, acquitted. For people who are, someone asks about the women, this is the record of the list of Negroes. And as we're reading, I think I came across maybe about 1. You didn't hear a lot of women's names coming up who came before the court. So I think that's interesting for those, again, for this conversation that's going on and people are upset about blah, 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 blah. We're reading it, and we're almost at the end. So thank you for sticking with us. Ferry and Archer, J.W. Parker, discharged without trial. Jim, belonging to William Vaughn, acquitted. Bob, belonging to Tempest Parker, D.O. Davy, belonging to Joseph Parker, doesn't say. Daniel, belonging to Solomon D. Parker, discharged without trial. Thomas Haddock, free individual, sent on for further trial. Joe belonged to John C. Turner, convicted. Lucy, there's the first name I saw come up. Lucy belonged to John T. Burrow, D.O. Matthew or Matt, Thomas Ridley is the owner, acquitted. Jim, Richard Porter, D.O. Some artists, a free individual sent on. So they had free individuals and they sent them on for further trial because they wanted to probably make an example. Joe, Richard P. Briggs, discharged without trial. Burry Newsom, a free individual, sent on for further trial. Stephen James Bell, acquitted. Jim and Isaac Samuel Champion, belonging to, convicted and transferred. I don't know, transported, I guess. Preston, belonging to Hannah Williamson, acquitted. Frank, belonging to Salem D. Parker, convicted and transported. Jack and Shadrach, belonging to Nathaniel Simmons, acquitted. Nelson, belonged to Benjamin Blunt's estate, D.O. Sam, belonged to Peter Edwards, convicted. Archer, belonging to Arthur C. G. Reese, acquitted. Ishmael Turner or Isham Turner, free individuals, sent on for further trial. And Nat Turner of Putnam Moore, deceased, because that was when an individual died, I believe, and convicted. So we had some convictions, we had some acquittals, we had some sent on for further trials. We only see one noticeable woman's name shows up, and that's Lucy, belonged to John T. Burrow. I'm gonna look into her story. But again, this is it right here. I'm trying to see if they have what DO is. But this is the end here. And I want to thank you for sticking with us, because what we just did was sourced some information. If you haven't seen the movie, or if you're going to go on to see the movie, that you were able to source some information, see where it's at. You understand? And be able to have a conversation, not just based surely on what we want to turn it into, but listening to the story of Nat Turner, seeing where he says in his own words, according to this testimony, he was coming from and why they were pushed to do what they do and did what they did. I'll share one more thing because it's very short. In September of 1831, are you guys still there? I know you guys are quiet. You still there? You still with me? You have any questions or comments? Feel free to let me know. In September of 1831, I'm gonna show it to you right now. Actually, before I do September, no, let me do September 1831. There was a paper. All of this stuff is interconnected, and I know they don't teach us this stuff in school, so it's all good. Let me get it one thing. This was the William Lloyd Garrison, which was the author of the editor of the Liberator, and the Liberator was an abolitionist newspaper that it was launched from January of 1831 all the way to after the Civil War of 1865. Now, it's funny because all of this stuff is right for us to see. Hold on one second. Here, you see, this is actually what do you call it here? The scanned copy of the first edition of the Liberator. Let me make it smaller for you, because I'm going to read something that came some 9 months later. Yes, we go into all of this stuff. The thought is that we won't go into it. The first one was January 1st, 1831. It was a Saturday. This is the Liberator by William Lloyd Garrison and Isaac Knapp. These are the publishers of this. And they published a lot of anti-slave information, pamphlets, newspapers that would be handed out. So when you saw a lot of the laws coming down afterwards, after this Nat Turner rebellion, that's what sparked fear into the hearts of the institution of slavery. So I just wanted to substantiate this about what I'm about to read right now. This is what William Lloyd Garrison had to say. He says, what we have so long predicted, and this was on the 3rd of 1831, what we have so long predicted at the peril of being stigmatized as an alarmist and declarer has commenced its fulfillment, the first step of the earthquake, which is untimely to shake down the fabric of oppression, leaving not one stone upon another has been made. The first drops of blood, which are but the prelude, this is what they've been afraid of up until this point, to deluge from the gathering clouds have fallen. The first flash of lightning, this is why it's always let me continue. This is why, why you go so, what's up with the brutal force with melanated people? This is what is behind brutal force with melanated people. Fear. And what the fear is of what we just read. The first flash of lightning, which is to smite and consume, has been felt. The first wailing of bereavement, which is to clothe the earth in sackcloth, have broken up our ears. And he's talking about the insurrection. It says in the first number of the Liberator, we alluded to the hour of vengeance in the following lines. Woe if it come with storm and blood and fire. This is the European writing this, William Lord Garrison. Two other Europeans, okay? When midnight darkness veils the earth and sky, woe to the innocent babe, the guilty sire, mother and daughter, friends of kindred tie, stranger and citizen alike shall die. Red-handed slaughter has his revenge shall feed, and havoc yell his ominous death cry. And while despair in vain for mercy plead, while hell itself shall shrink and sicken at the deed. It says here, read the account of the insurrection in Virginia and say whether our prophecy be not fulfilled. What was poetry, imagination in January is now a bloody reality. Woe to the innocent babe, to mother and daughter. It is not true. Sorry, is it not true? Turn again to the record of slaughter. Whole families have been cut off. Not a mother, not a daughter, not a babe left. Dreadful retaliation, the dead bodies of white and black laying just as they slain unburied. The oppressor and the oppressed equal at last in death. What a spectacle. He goes on to say, true, the rebellion is quelled. Those of slaves who were not killed in combat have been secured, and the prison is crowded with victims destined for the gallows. Yet laugh not in your carnival of crime, too proudly, you oppressors. You have seen it is to be feared, but the beginning of sorrows. All the blood which has been shed will be required at your hands. At your hands alone? No, but at the hands of the people of New England and of all the free states. The crime of oppression is national. The South is only the agent of this guilty traffic. But remember, the same causes are at work which must inevitably produce the same effects. And when the contest shall have again begun, it must gain a war of extermination. In the present instance, no quarters have been asked or forgiven. But we have killed and routed them now. We can do it again and again. We are invincible. A dastardly triumph, well becoming a nation of oppressors. Detestable complacency that can think without emotion of the extermination of the blacks. We have the power to kill all. Let us therefore continue to apply the whip and forge new fetters. Keep in mind, slavery was still, you know what I'm saying? So he's speaking to the Europeans. He goes on to say, in his fury against the revolters, who will remember their wrongdoings? What will it avail them, though the catalog of their sufferings dripping with warm blood fresh from the lacerated bodies be held up to extenuate their conduct? It is enough that the victims were black, that circumstances make less precious than the dogs which have been laid in our street. They were black brutes pretending to be men, legions of curses upon their memories. They were black. God made them to serve us. Ye patriotic hypocrites, you panegyrists of Frenchmen, Greeks, and Poles, you Fuchsian declarers for liberty, you valiant sticklers for equal rights among yourselves, you haters of aristocracy, you salients of monarchies, you Republican nullifiers. So he basically cursing them out. You treasonable disunionists, be dumb. Cast no reproach upon the conduct of the slaves, but let your lips and cheeks wear the blisters of condemnation. And keep in mind, they tried to string this dude up. You understand? They tried to, you got to look the history of William Lord Garrison. He says, you accuse the Pacific Friends of Emancipation of instigating the slaves to revolt. Let me read that again. You accuse the Pacific Friends of Emancipation of instigating the slaves to revolt. Take back the charge as a foul slander. The slaves need no incentive at our hands. They will find them in their stripes, in their emancipated bodies, in their ceaseless toil, in their ignorant minds, in every field, in every valley, on every hilltop and mountain, wherever you and your father have fought for liberty. in your speeches, your conversations, your celebrations, your pamphlets, your newspapers, voices in the air, sounds from across the ocean, invitations to resistance above, below, around them. What more do they need? Surrounded by such influences and smarting under their newly made wounds. Is it wonderful that they should rise to contend as other heroes, quote unquote, have contended for their rights? Is it not wonderful? In all that we have written, is there aught to justify the excess of slavery? No. Nevertheless, they deserve no more censure than the Greeks in destroying the Turks, or the Poles in exterminating the Russians, or fathers in slaughtering the British. Our fathers in slaughtering the British. Dreadful indeed is the standard erected by worldly patriotism. I think we almost here. Lastly, he says, for ourselves, we are horror struck at the late tidings. We have exerted our utmost effort to avert the calamity. We have warned our countrymen of the danger of persisting in their unrighteous conduct. We have preached to the slaves the pacific precepts of JC, he said, Jesus Christ here. We have appealed to Christians, philanthropists, and patriots for their assistance to accomplish the great work of national redemption through the agency of moral power, of public opinion, of individual duty. How have we been received? We have been threatened, proscribed, vilified, and imprisoned, a laughingstock and a reproach. Do we falter in view of these tidings? Let time answer. If we have been here too urgent and bold and denunciatory in our efforts, hereafter we shall grow vehement and active with the increase of danger. We shall cry in trumpet tones and night and day, woe to this guilty land, unless she speedily repent of her evil doings. The blood of millions of her sons cry aloud for redress. Immediate emancipation alone can save her from the vengeance of heaven and cancel the debt of ages. That was what he wrote on insurrection, 1831, September the 3rd. So this is what we're listening to today, basically. What's up? I'm almost done. Give me 2 seconds. Today, we look at something that happens, and then we go, boom, and we see the newspaper, and they report about it. You go to the New York Times, you go to the Washington Post, you go to this Atlanta Black Star, and you want to read about what the people felt about what happened. So what you just read was a real time, in that time, what the people felt about what happened. And this particular individual was somebody, as you read there, he was telling y'all, ease up off that stuff because they're going to fight back. And so, again, all of this stuff is accessible. There are copies of the Liberator online scanned in for your perusal so that you can see that this stuff is not made up and that there's a lot of information. Basically, this Negro dilemma is what still prevails within this country, of what to do with the Negro, because for certainty they're not going to continue to what's the word I'm looking for, endure. And so this brute force that we're seeing, it's not coming from nowhere. This police killings that we're seeing, it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from a genuine deep fear. And this genuine deep fear is that one day, as he said, you're going to have to answer. And it's in an attempt to not have to answer. And so with that, I want to thank everybody for sticking. I have more, as you can see. But again, I'm just going to give it a little bit so we could kind of process that. I have to kind of update as I go through and find this information, and then, share it with you so that you can edify yourself and share it with others. We have here, and I'll read some of the comments. Okay. We have, everybody said he's still here. David Lance, I saw the movie last night, so I'm just listening. Okay. All right. So we just gave, all right. Thank you, David. We gave some background on that. Arbina says Jesse Michael Gomez, Gavin Long, Micah X, Karen Gaines, Chris Dorna, and more on the way are modern day Nat Turners. We have Antron Bailey says they're still here. They're still listening. Thanks for what you do. Thank you so much, Sister Mark. I believe it's Marquita. When you look out and you see that even our people are buying into this culture, hi baby, of just glossing over of this hype and propaganda, and We're not taking the time to look at what's there. It's like right here, because a lot of us have an aversion to reading and diving deeper, because I'm not doing this. As you can see, some people will be like, well, if you did such and such, you would get more viewers and blah, blah. I'm like, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this for edification. I'm doing this for the children. I'm doing this for parents and people and my brothers and sisters, because I could just do this all by my onesie. Like my friend would say, I could do this offline. But why am I sharing? Because sharing is caring, right? And so when we go into places that I cannot reach, but if I can reach somebody who can reach somebody, and if we can understand our predicament, we will make better choices. If we understand history that has been hidden and taken away from us, and caused us to forget, then we can better navigate our way around the situation that we find ourselves in. We will get off the merry-go-round, so to say. We will make, like I said, better choices. And hopefully that's what this is. And it takes time to go into it. We have a lot of scholars, but what the issue I find is that the information is not sourced. And when the information is not sourced, then we're only forced to believe the angle that the individual, even though they may have the best intentions, whatever they hang up is, whatever their insecurity is, whatever their focus is, that's all we're going to get. That's how they're going to filter the information. And this is why I feel it very important, even though you may hear my little 1 and 2, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I can't hold back, but I don't want you to be like Emunah said. I want you to be like, click on the link, read for yourself, and critically analyze that which you're seeing. And because I work like that, for those who work the way I work, in the sense of, can you source that for me? You know what I'm saying? I do that, and I put that extra in. So I thank you very much for the appreciation, because it's not easy, but it's it's worth it. Antron says they need to tell the story of John Horse, John Caesar, and my great uncle Chief Abraham having one of the largest slave rebellions. No, wait, Antron, I bid you that you help tell the story. And I say this with the most love, because oftentimes we think that other people have more power than we do to tell our own story. And this is something I want to talk about. I found a video from Ozzie Davis and James Baldwin clapping back at the second novel fictional narrative of the slave rebellion, and that was their very argument. Why do you have to feel the need to tell our story? What I had to rate about what I'm hearing about the fact that this is 8 years of a project. Obama has been in presidency for 8 years. For 8 years, he was struggling with bringing this story to life. It was not easy. We don't necessarily have to do it in each way, but if you have a story that you know about, I'll invite you on here. We could do it wherever we are, to come and tell that story, Antron. Tell us the story. Let us hear it, because before there were big screens and radios and YouTube, there was the campfire. There was sitting around and listening to the griot, listening to the storyteller, listening to the individual who had that history. They passed it on. So we don't need the flashing lights and all of this and that. All we need is those who have the information, who's willing to disseminate it and go back to base. So I bid you, if you have a story to tell, come and let's talk. Marquita says, yeah, I heard about the skull. Yep, and they wrote books. My daughter says, and they wrote books, indeed. We have to get back into regaining our own narrative, and we have to do that by sharing it and not allowing other people to take hold of it and then spin it into what they wanted to believe. Marquita says the guilt was always there. They knew it was wrong and had to come up with a way to rationalize their view. The book Bind Us Apart talks about this. Yeah, it's always there. And as we saw in the court transcripts, he tried to blame, see, it's all your fault. There were happy Negroes before you came along, Nat Turner. But as we saw in the Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison said they don't need a reason outside of their reality, where some said it was better to rise and fight than to die. I mean, or to live as a slave. So we're going to say David Land says, yes, it was completely and truly propaganda. Wait, maybe I missed something here. Which one am I looking at? What was propaganda, David Lance? Let us know. Hearing you read the narratives help make what we feel, the connection, the frustration makes common sense. And that's another reason why I do it. Because sometimes people are like, oh, the movie is too hard to look at or whatever. And so I committed to it because I'm about healing. If anybody doesn't know me, my name is Emunah Yisrael. I do the Left Project and everything else I do because I'm big on healing. Healing that intergenerational wound that was placed, that we experienced through the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. And so this is why I do it, because at first we have an aversion to it. We're like, nah, I don't want to hear it. But as we work our way through, we can face it. And once we face it, then we can heal from it and overcome. Thank you so much, Vector. Vector 313 is another person who been trooping with the Lev Project for months. So shout out to Marquita, shout out to Vector 313, shout out to Son of Levi, shout out to Person Kid, a lot of people who've been sticking with the Lev Project, Sister Angel, Sister Tish, my daughter, Shiloh. So definitely absolutely keep doing what you do, watching, taking notes, passing these stories to my daughter. This is what it's about. We have to empower these children, not with fairy tales, but with truth, so that they can draw strength. It's not always something to cry about. It's something to say, we're here. So there's something that we can draw strength from and continue. David Land says, Hollywood has convinced us that only stories worth telling, worth watching, and worth hearing are those that make it to the big screen. I agree. And this is, we don't need no big screen. We don't need a big screen. All we have to do, because guess what? We are the power. If no one goes to the movies, the story is not translated. So whether we saw it on a big screen, or we heard it on a Lev Project, or we watched it in a video, or we heard it from our granny, it's a story that we can translate. Or you read it in a book. So we have to to a degree, reevaluate the value that we put on information. Oh, that's just Emunah. Oh, that's just such and brother such and such. Oh, that's just the dude around the corner. Oh, they told us in Hollywood. It must be true. We have to reevaluate that thought process and really just begin to come to terms. And I would just bid you, before I go, because I know how long I've been running. Jeez Louise, I'm hot right now. Like, man, let me get some water up in here. Stop it, Charlotte. Sorry, I'm getting hot. But there's more to share. I'm just gonna do it in intervals. I didn't think, I don't know, the movie for me didn't seem propaganda-ish, especially when you are measuring it here. I do think that elements, and I got the other book, so I'm gonna read through that as well. I just ordered it. I do think that elements may have come from elsewhere. And this is why I want to know, what's your source material? And that's why at the Left Project, I just read source material. I'm big on source material, because this is the material, it's not second, it's primary source, meaning it's coming from the individual, or the individual is narrating it, so that we can kind of get to the base. When I come back next time, I'm going to read from some of the books that I read before, because specifically they were asked about Nat Turner's rebellion. And specifically, they spoke about, and these two books were people who were in Virginia. And so specifically, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And this is Weevils in the Wheat, which is interviews with Virginia ex-slaves. So remember, I told you about Henry. There's something interesting about Henry and Henry's family in here that I was like, yo, did I read that? I did. So at the next conversation we have with this Birth of Nation controversy, we'll be able to go into that. So with that said, my name is Emunah Yisrael, Solonamis 101. May we continue to grow, elevate, and heal from the wounds that we have sustained in this diaspora. Everybody have a blessed day. And I'm sorry, Alado is on the sidelines right now. He'll be back, but this is some necessary conversation. So please continue to stick with us. And if you enjoyed the video, share it. Thank you. Everybody have a good day.